everybody. So we are so excited today. We are here to have another episode of our monthly series where we talk about obscure, underappreciated, smaller, independent animation. This month, in the spirit of St. Patrick's Day, we are talking about the Irish filmmaker Tomm Moore. We're going to talk about both of his movies, Secret of the Kells and Song of the Sea. So I'm so excited about that. And I'm Rachel, and Stanford's here.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. This is going to be really good.
I'm excited too. Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah. So Tomm Moore, he is my personal favorite living animator. Now, I've just loved both of his movies that he's made so far. He comes out of Kilkenny, Ireland, and their production company is Cartoon Saloon. And his movies are The Secret of the Kells and The Song of the Sea. And what are your experience with Tomm Moore, his films? And
so again, the first I had heard about him was with The Secret of the Kells,
yeah.
and in 2009 when I saw that film on the big screen, and
lucky.
I had read a lot of stuff, when that film came out, and then also just enjoyed seeing it, experiencing it. And then I was so happy that he had a follow, his second film. Even though it was 5 years later, I was glad it wasn't like 10 years later. You know what I mean? I was grateful that when the Song of the Sea came out in I believe that was 2014, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, just instantly admired the artistry and just interesting interpretation of these Irish stories.
Yeah, I really love all of the colors and the way he does. Almost every background is interesting and moving.
Yeah,
and
every frame of film is gorgeous.
So beautiful in the world of where all the CG movies kind of look the same, or they're sort of spectrum. To see these movies is just like, wow.
Yeah, exactly.
And he does. It's interesting because his movies are pretty steeped in Irish lore.
Yes.
And he doesn't really take much time to actually explain that lore. It's just there. Mm-hmm. But you don't really care because it doesn't really matter if you understand, say, what the fairies are in Song of the Sea, because you just know they're like goofy magic people. Like, yeah. It does not matter if you know all of the lore of the Silky, or all you know is that she is one, that Circe is one, and she needs to get back.
Yes.
That's it. That's all you really need. You don't need to know sort of the intricacies of all of it.
Yeah, exactly. And he, since these stories are both based, in a lot of mythology too, some of that mythology is, even though it's, this stuff is very specific to Ireland, it also could be somewhat universal, in some of its themes and tone, kind of the tone of it too. Yeah. I'm with you. Yeah, that you can kind of pick up who's who, or or what's what.
You get the heart of his characters very well. Mm-hmm. He does a great job with that. You just feel so invested in what his characters are doing, and I don't know. It's just so, and it's so beautiful. It's very peaceful, very meditative. I feel like watching his movies, you're just relaxed after.
Yeah.
Watching one of his movies. And we'll talk about it. I have a special connection with Song of the Sea. I actually hadn't heard of him until I saw Song of the Sea, and then I saw Secret of the Kells because I loved it. I loved Song of the Sea so much. And I wasn't I wasn't animation blogging back in 2009. And 2009 was such an incredible year for animation that it was amazing that it kind of rose to the to the top, because that same year you had Princess and the Frog, Fantastic Mr. Fox, Coraline, you had what's it called? A town called Panic. That's hilarious.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That I did way back when I was just doing reviews for obscure animation. I did that one because it's hilarious. And there's the movie 9, which we've also done for obscure animation that I think is a little underrated. I like it. And I don't know, there's just a ton that year.
And Hello, Pixar's Up too.
Right. Duh, my favorite movie.
Yeah.
And
it was an amazing year.
Incredible. Best year ever in the history of animation, no question. But yeah, it's really, I'm sure there was a DreamWorks movie that year. I just can't think of it.
Likewise.
But anyway.
Or I blocked it, as you know.
Yeah. It was just a really, really, really good year. And so it's probably natural that some of these smaller ones might get a little bit lost. But it's a movie, once I did see it, I really did love it. And I think it's wonderful. And I ended up, spoiler alert to my best of 2009 podcast will be coming pretty soon. It is in my top 10 for that year.
Yeah.
The Secret of the Kells. So,
well, I believe it was also nominated for Best Animated Feature Award,
yes.
for the Academy Awards. And I was so happy about that too, that I think gives films recognition, and
yeah.
And
I mean, what a strong year for the Oscars to have Up, Coraline, Fantastic Mr. Fox, Secret of the Kells, and Princess and the Frog, all movies that in most years could have individually won for sure.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. So anyway, yeah, it had to be pretty special to rise to the top is what I'm saying about this movie. And I like Song of the Sea better than Secret of the Kells personally, because it just emotionally have that connection. But I still think this is a really strong little movie. And the plot it's interesting because the plot is complicated and simple at the same time.
I know, it is. It's really, yeah, well said. Yeah.
Because there's not a ton of plot, but there's a lot of stuff that happens to our little friend Brendan.
Yes. Little Brendan.
Yes. So Brendan lives in this town that's petrified by the Vikings. They're very scared. And there's this abbey there, the Abbey of the Kells. And he has this uncle named Kellic.
Yeah.
Kellic. I don't know if you pronounce it. And he's just obsessed with building this wall. His uncle is very fearful of these Vikings and their attack. And there's a whole sort of scriptorium thing that they have at the abbey, and the uncle kind of has sort of a dismissive kind of feeling about about the scriptorium. He really is dismissal of anything that's not building this wall.
It's not building the wall. Yeah. It's like everything needs to be focused on building that protective wall around the city.
Yeah. What did you think of that dynamic?
I thought it clearly sets up the conflict, right? Sets up the dramatic conflict of the film. First off, I was really taken again by the animation style of that wall. It's so interesting how it's drawn. It's almost like it's got all this scaffolding around it, and these interesting kind of peaks and valleys in the top of it, and it's very striking. It seems within that dramatic conflict though, so there's setting up this wall, trying to close them off, and then there's the group of monks that are working on these illuminated texts, and it's the texts that bring people life. It's the texts that bring, as they learn about Christianity and the doctrines that Jesus Christ preached. I mean, in theory, they're supposed to bring light and openness and goodness, and so it's this really interesting kind of pull. I think that how are we saying his name again? The Selleck.
Kellic.
Is I mean, he's trying to do good by protecting the people, but then the way he's treating the monks and everything is just like he's shutting him down too. I mean, like he's like good and bad. You know, it brings some complexity. I think his character.
I agree. I feel like he could be a little bit better fleshed out, like have a little more motivation, have a little more.
Yeah, it's a one note kind of thing.
Yeah.
With him.
His character design, he's so much bigger than everybody else.
Yes.
That it's a little, I don't know, it's just an interesting choices that they made with that. But there's this book of Iona.
Yes.
That is kept by Aiden, the head of the monastery, Brother Aiden, and it's the book that turns darkness into light, and it's only written with this special ink that is like a blessed ink, I guess. Mm-hmm. The line between like magic and religion is a little weird in this.
It's a little, that's another thing that it's kind of loosey-goosey.
and a lot of that is probably the case with the actual mythology, is that it's somewhat combined. But there's this special ink that used to write in the book, and there's obviously all this darkness happening in the town with the Vikings and everything. And but Brendan has an immediate interest in the book, and he kind of becomes sort of a bit of an apprentice of Aiden. And Aiden also has this cat called Ponger Bon.
Yes.
Cat.
Yes.
And I liked the animation on the cat.
Oh yeah, the cat. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, really cool character designs. with every from the cats to the people, and
they're very geometric. Very. There's sort of a swirling quality to both of these films in his animation, which I really enjoy.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, and so he ends up going to the forest. Brendan, he gets sent by Aiden into the forest to find these gall nuts that are needed to make the ink for the book. And it's there that he's almost killed by wolves, and that was a really cool scene.
Yeah,
animated. And then this character named Osling ends up saving him from the wolves, and it turns out she is a fairy of the forest. So, what did you think about Osling?
Well, I think she's a beautifully realized character. This is one of those things that's really focusing on kind of the magic portion that we're talking about with this film, but I quite like her, and she's the one who's on the poster and the cover art too. Looking through the kind of the greenery. I think she's got such wonderful eyes, and so interesting character that kind of brings some of the more magic or mystical element into the story. What's your take?
I mean, she starts out against Brendan. She doesn't like him, but as she starts talking to him, she becomes more convinced of his goodness, and she's very terrified of this creature, the Crom Crouch, who is like death and destruction and evil and bad. She's very scared, and so she's not. It's kind of refreshing in a way to have a fantastical character, I guess a female character that's a little bit more meek and scared, and not the like Howard characters that you usually see.
Really vulnerable
in most movies these days.
Yeah, I think she's a really vulnerable character, that is not overly cocky about her abilities or how she could overcome the villain. Yeah.
I think a lot of kids will really that are more quiet, that are a little more introverted, will be able to relate to a lot of the characters in Tomm Moore's
Yeah.
stories.
Mm-hmm.
They're just a little bit more sort of emotional and sweet, and I appreciate that a lot about his characters. And
Yes.
so he ends up coming back, and he's heavily reprimanded by Selleck, and he's told to never go to the monastery again, to not work with Aiden, but he still does. And it turns out that Aiden has lost what's called the Eye of Colm Killy, and it's kind of like a uh, it's like a translation kind of device, sort of,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that they need to be able to finish the book, and to be able to. It's been captured by Croc, and so Brendan decides that he's going to go and get the eye, but he's confined by Selleck, but then Osling and the cat, who look very much alike. I think they're they're kind of siblings in a way.
Yeah, that's what I've kind of interpreted too.
Yeah.
I thought it with this viewing as well, that clearly the idea was to demonstrate that they're related somehow.
Yeah.
The cat has two different colored eyes, but still so similar in design and in their color styling, and yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And it's good. I mean, because cats are usually villains,
Yes.
So we've had a good run here with Goose, and then now Congrabot. So, so Brendan decides that he's going to go after Cromcrotch to get the eye of Colm and so he's running, towards the forest, but Osling is very scared of him doing this because she's worried that he's going to get killed. And so Brendan has to kind of persuade Osling to help him to do this. And he enters the cave. He nearly gets killed.
Yeah.
And then he ends up getting the eye because he's able to basically like blind the Chrome Croc. And so he let's see. And so he becomes kind of another creature when he's blinded by the eye.
Yeah.
And that whole sequence is really beautiful. Really well done.
Oh yeah, it's really so compelling, and both the animation, the editing, for lack of a better term, but the way that whole scene is assembled really is remarkable, and it's really you're like kind of on the edge of your seat, right? Yeah.
The animation in that scene with Chrome, it almost looks like it's a chalkboard drawing to me.
Yes.
And the way it sort of builds and builds and builds is really, really cool and really beautiful. And like I said, even if you're a little bit confused or kind of about the names or some of those things, it doesn't really matter because you understand that it's just a battle between the bad guy and good guy and what's going on.
Yes.
Yeah. So I really like that. And so then he's able to come back, and they're able to make huge progress with the book because he has the eye. And so they are very excited. And then Kellic finds them, and he rips the page from the book, and he's very upset. And right then, the Vikings invade the Kells. And so there's some like truth to why Selleck was so scared, because I love the animation. It's really beautiful. It's like this red and black.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden everything is when the Vikings attack. And I think that's all really well done. Very striking is the word I should use.
Yes. Yeah. I agree with you. I really love that choice of red and black, and just, how dramatic it is, how emotional it makes you feel, or the emotions that it brings out in you as this is unfolding.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And I also really liked, I forgot to mention, when he gets out of the cave after fighting Chrome, there's just these like white flowers all over the place, which I thought was kind of a nice little symbolism, because he's just defeated at least momentarily, defeated the darkness. And so there's all these white flowers everywhere, which I liked. And so they, after the war, it turns out that Kellic gets injured, and then Brendan gets the book and the pages, and he basically escapes. And the next time you see him, Aiden says, next time you see Brendan, he's an adult. And Aiden says, you must take the book to the people so that they have hope.
Yeah.
And so that's when he goes, and you see he has his spends time with the dying Selleck, and who's thought that he was dead all this time. And after many years, and so they have a nice reconciliation, and he shows them the completed book that they were able to do, and you see the illuminated page, the beautiful pages, and so there's new hope for the town or for the village or whatever.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how the movie ends up. And do you have any other kind of overall thoughts about Secret of the Kells?
Well, I do. Yeah. I've been to Dublin, Ireland, and I've seen the actual Book of Kells, and it's on display in the Trinity College Library there in Dublin, and they've got a museum exhibit, and some replicas or some enlargements of some of those illuminated panels. Excuse me. And then they actually have the book there, and it's under glass, of course. But this movie it's particularly those that final minute when those pages of the book, they animate the drawings, and it's so cool, because it's almost like it's a combination of organic and also machinery. It's almost it looks like there's spinning gears and all these different things within. And that's one of the things I just would love to talk to Tomm Moore about. How did they do that?
Tom, if you're listening, we would love to do an interview.
I know.
If you listen, we would love it. It's really interesting, because in my research, I found out that he was inspired by a couple different things, particularly The Thief and the Cobbler.
Yeah.
Which we should definitely do for obscure animation one of these days.
Yes, for sure.
And also Disney's Mulan and Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli films. Mm-hmm. Particularly in this one, you can really see Princess Mononoke. I think it's
absolutely.
A very heavy influence on this movie, with the battles, with the lore. You've got the forest creatures. You've got there's a lot of similarities from Princess Mononoke, and I can see all of those things in here for sure. Yeah.
One of the other things that I really just love, just kind of frame to frame of this film, is that they've included all this Celtic and medieval art or symbols or just elements in every frame.
Yeah.
And they bring it in, and it's integrated beautifully. And then finally, with the culmination of the segment, that final segment, when the actual pages are coming to life, that is such a satisfying conclusion of kind of seeing all of that come together.
Yeah, and I love all of the music. Bruno Collis does all the music, and I think he's amazing. And I especially love the violins in they're very violin forward, I feel like, in a lot
Mm-hmm.
of sections, and it's just beautiful violin solo.
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah.
And it's a very uh, thoughtful, meditative, lovely little movie, I think.
It's, I think it's a beautiful movie too. I think, if there were to be any kind of criticism, and I wonder if it's just because I'm not Irish, I mean, or I don't understand all of the symbolism of the things that we're talking about,
Yeah.
but still, as you said, that can be overcome because so many of these things are somewhat universal,
Right.
as far as the mythology of it goes. But the story sometimes maybe gets a little bogged down, but then anytime the story wasn't necessarily working for me, I just would get lost in the art, and I just really enjoy just looking at the beautiful animation.
Yeah, I agree with you on all those points. I think, like I said, sort of Selick is kind of not my
Yeah,
favorite,
yeah,
but I would say I think The Secret of the Kells is a really solid, good movie. I think that Song of the Sea, and I know people say masterpiece all the time, and it's a way overused word, but I really do believe it's a masterpiece. I absolutely love Song of the Sea, and so I feel like this was Secret of the Kells was a really solid jumpstart to then really nailing it in Song of the Sea.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So anyway, well, let's talk about Song of the Sea because I have
Yes,
lots to say
yes,
on it.
definitely.
So, first of all, this movie has a special spot in my heart because it was right when I was just starting to kind of do reviews regularly that I saw Song of the Sea, and because I'd hurt my it didn't come out in Utah until 2015. I'd hurt my leg in 2014, and so that's when I started sort of blogging, and then it was a little bit later that I started later that year that I started doing the whole YouTube thing, as far as, because I've been doing unboxings, but as far as animation, reviews. And so I made a goal that I was going to see every single film that was submitted to the Academy for Best Animated Feature. I was going to see every single one of them for 2014. Of course, I couldn't see Song of the Sea until 2015. Anyway, I was very excited, to see it because it got nominated by that point. And my cousin had passed away about a month before I saw it, and we weren't super close, but I had just been to her funeral, and her two little boys she left behind, and one of the little boys got up and spoke, actually, and talked about how he said something to the effect of that there'd always be this hole in his heart, and how could and nobody would ever be able to explain to him why somebody had to take away his mom, and it was devastating, and just it was so sad. And the minister was like, no, nobody understands, nobody can answer that question completely. And it was very sad. And I go see this movie just days, after
Oh my goodness,
that had happened. And seeing little Ben going through the loss of his mother made me I just kept thinking of my little I don't know what they call the children of your cousins. Is that second cousin, or
I think it might
or
be
is
second
that
cousin,
your parents' cousins or second
yeah,
cousins? I don't know. But anyway, and I literally, I think I sat in I don't think I've ever cried more in a movie, watching a movie. And I sat in the theater and was just like inconsolable after it ended.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the first time I've ever cried in a review. Even every time I see it, I cry. Every time I think about it, I cry.
Yeah.
And I just think it's a beautiful movie on every level. But I think it is such a beautiful movie about grief. And I like the fact that that he does get to say goodbye finally at the end to his mom. And when he gets that moment, it's just the best.
Yeah, that's a good moment. And so beautiful. Tomm Moore and his team just is such a perfect way they put that together. It's really, really great.
Yeah. And I mean, and I love the ocean. So already that's a huge theme for me. I mean, just everything about this movie is like perfect for me. But, you know, a lot of people might have a problem with the fact that Ben is kind of a brat to start out the movie because he's bitter against Circe, his sister, who is a mute, so she can't really speak for herself and kind of participate in sort of an argument or whatever. And his father is just so like caught in grief that he's really no help to Ben. And so he's just this bitter, upset little boy. And I think that's actually a strength to the movie. I don't think that that's a weakness because I can just relate to that, you know?
Yeah.
And I actually think that's a brave choice and I really like it.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, so there's so many things that I love about this movie. It starts out with his mom is there, is pregnant, and you see her with Ben. That he, you know, that obviously they love each other, adores his mother, and that his mom tells stories. And you have some of the same voice cast of the previous film. You have
Yes.
Brendan Gleeson
Brendan
back.
Gleeson, who is like the cartoon saloon MVP. He's so good. That was the one thing I did like about uh,
Selleck.
Selleck, is that Brendan Gleeson was his voice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so she puts Ben to bed, and then she's gonna have the baby, and she has to go into the ocean to have the baby. And so the mother is a Selkie, which is a figure of Irish lore, and that you're part human and part seal.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Like, where did that come from? But it's kind of a cool concept.
Yeah. And she has the baby, but she has to go. She has to leave in order to protect the baby. And so you see her just kind of, the baby kind of washes up with, she's got her silky cloak that she has. And so then it jumps ahead to 6 years later. And this is when you see that Ben is kind of bitter. You see Circe is a little girl and she is mute. She can't talk. And you see the dad, Connor, is just immobilized by grief.
Yeah, I was going to say he just hasn't recovered from any of this.
Yeah. And so Circe, it's like a very difficult name. Circe. She and this whole opening scene where you see her swimming as Selkie is so beautiful. The way that the waves swirl. I wanted to show you. So this is my Song of the Sea art book.
Cool.
Yes. So this art book is more, some art books are more text and some are more art, and this is more art, but there's some good stuff. So I wanted to show you. They put in a lot of work into just the shapes of the waves, and even like as far as even into the droplets.
Oh, that's cool.
What they were going to look like. And I don't know, that was really impressive to me. So
interesting. Wow.
Yeah, it was really cool. And so yeah, and they talk about here like the internal lines of how a splash works and the force of the splash.
Yeah,
and all of that stuff. It's really pretty cool.
Any scene that they were out on the ocean. I mean, again, this is another one of those, just like The Secret of the Kells, where every frame is beautiful. I just thought it was so creative and inventive how they animated the ocean. This is so interesting to see this breakdown, because overall I'm just I'm amazed and trying to figure out how in the world did they create it.
They even worked into how the foam was going to look. The different little bits of foam coming out. This is amazing to me. So I thought that was really cool. And anyway, let me go back here. So yeah, it's a really beautiful. Plus you have the music by Bruno Callias and the singer Kia.
Yeah.
And she has beautiful
voice.
Relaxing.
It is. It's relaxing. And melancholy and haunting, kind of all bundled in one. She's so good. Such a perfect choice.
Yeah. And it just draws you into the whole atmosphere of the character. And there's so much, you can even see it on this cover, how within every single thing, whether it's a background, whether it's a wave, you see how there's animation within the wave. You see how there's triangles, there's shapes. That to me is really, really cool.
Yeah.
Just such an attention to detail is really great. And they do have also have a dog named Kul that is pretty cute.
Yeah, the dog is great.
And so the grandmother finds Circe in on the beach after her swim, and she's very upset and she's very worried about the state of this family, and which I can understand why you would. Yeah. But she's kind of painted as sort of a villain a little bit, and especially when later you see when you meet Maka, she's very similar in design to Granny, but both of them aren't really villains because they're just trying to protect the people they love. So I think that's kind of an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's interesting, to how much they how similar they are in design and in intent.
Yeah, here in this book, it says, you can see a picture, but in the book it says, cartoon villains are often great fun and the most visually exciting characters on screen. But for Song of the Sea, I was initially resistant to the idea of an antagonist like that. When we realized that Granny and Maka were the bad guys from the kids' point of view, we knew we could craft a fun and interesting villain that in many ways is not really a villain at all. In story meetings with Will and Nora, we developed someone who is, in some forms, quite sympathetic, who wouldn't want to spare their child pain in any way they can. And so we'll talk a little bit more of that, but yeah, so that's kind of the grandma character, and we'll talk about Maka coming up. But yeah, there is that. They are very sympathetic. They're not really villains at all, but from the kids' perspective, they are. Yeah,
they absolutely are.
Yeah, I like that. That was really good. And so then the dad puts the Selkie suit in the trunk, and he says, we can't lose her too. Throws the trunk into the sea, and Circe uses the seashell that was left behind by her mother to alert the fairies to her, the fairies, and then the kids are sent with. Then the kids go to the city to live with their granny, and they don't want to go, and they leave. Are forced to. They can't even take the dog.
Yeah, I know. It's just so sad.
Yes, and so there's these 3 fairy men that respond to the call. What did you think of them?
It's an interesting. I thought it was an interesting approach to it, and they're interesting enough. I guess. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I think they're really fun. There's the whole the literally the hole in the ground that they end up going, the cave,
Yes.
whatever you want to call it, with the fairies, and that scene is really fun. There's all the music, and it's also there's the trick-or-treating scene, which is really fun. There's Halloween.
Yeah, that's fun.
And the fairies kind of disguise themselves as trick-or-treaters.
Yeah.
And they say here that the fairies that Ben and Circe meet in the fairy fort, that's what's called Nut Cave, went through several incarnations as the story developed. They became musicians only during the creation of story reels. Prior to that, they briefly represented cheeky friends for Ben, living on the Halloween loot of sweets they collected once a year when they could venture out. Then they became a sort of Dad's Army Royal Guard, sworn to protect the Selkie from Maka's owls. Eventually, we hit upon the idea of them being musicians, which allowed us to simplify their exposition into a song, and the sequence really clicked together then. One thing I was glad we kept was the sense that they returned to a nobler, more majestic farm when freed from Maka's spell at the end of the film.
Yes.
For me, they represent how the ancient gods of Irish myth gradually devolved into funny little leprechaun figures over the years of colonization and the coming of Christianity. So that was interesting. You see the way they evolved. But I think it does work.
Because, I think it works too.
Because there's just this song. It's just fun. It's light. And you don't really, I didn't even know that they were fairies until I started researching this podcast. I was just like, oh, they're just like fun magic men. And I'm like, oh, that's what they're called.
Like, oh yeah, they're the fairies.
And so, so there's the owls from Maka that are chasing them, and they end up capturing, and then they end up turning the fairies into stone. And because Maka, her goal.
Maka is the owl witch.
Yes. Maka's the owl witch, and she believes that she wants to take. It's kind of similar in a weird way to Thanos a little bit. She wants to take away all of the suffering, but she doesn't actually kill people. But she just puts their feelings in jars, and then they end up, without their feelings, they end up turning into stone.
And they turn into stone.
Yeah.
So it's kind of really misguided.
Yes. And the let's see here. And the reason why she does this is because she's so sad about her son, who her son was in love. This is here. She represents another aspect of the mythological mother figure. She is named for a character Maka in the Irish mythology. And so her son had his heart broken and was crying so much that he basically created the ocean. And so she decides she can't handle him crying anymore, so she turns him into stone, and he becomes basically like the mountain near the he becomes an island all of himself.
Yeah.
And so then her goal is to basically turn everybody into stone so they don't have to suffer like that, which I think is really really interesting. But they don't really spend a ton of time in exposition.
It's just all done visually. You just see it and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I love the design of that island. I'm sorry to interrupt you. That of her son. It's almost like he's kneeling down. He's got this long beard and he's crying, right? Or just looks super sad. And I just love how because if you first look at the island, you wouldn't really see it. But then once you do, you're like, oh, that's why it's shaped the way it is. I thought that was, again, another genius design.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention too that so she has Circe, but there's also in order for Ben to find Maka, he first has to get help from what's called the Great Senekai.
Yeah.
And he has magic hair, and each hair tells a story. and and the one of the hares tells the story of Mach Lear, who is the son of Maka. And I do think that this is probably the only spot in the movie that maybe gets a little confusing about who this guy is.
Yeah.
But I don't really care. I just went with it.
Likewise. I just went with it. And again, I was just so amazed at the lighting and the animation in the sequence, and just how neat his, all the hair is. And
yeah, I agree. I think it's really, really beautiful. All the ways to use blue and silver.
All those shades of blue and silver are so wonderful.
Yeah, it says here. It says here the great Siakai represents an oral tradition of storytelling in Ireland, where instead of writing down stories, they were memorized by traveling storytellers who constantly reimagined and reinvented them for audiences over generations. Our hope is that by making this film, we contribute to the transmission process and keep the stories in the popular consciousness for another generation in a new way. So that's pretty cool.
That's cool.
Yeah. But anyway, he's just kind of a fun character. They do get a little bit of exposition from him. Obviously, you get the story of this son and more about Maka. And it's just really, really, really beautiful. And I mean, it's such a great way of they integrate so many different dynamics into this movie without making it feel, because a lot of fantasy is very boring to me. And I think they managed to work in tons of different lore, tons of different ideas without it just staying places.
Yeah.
It's constantly moving and changing. And there's so many different kind of movies within this one movie.
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, so yes, they at first he's kind of convinced that Maka maybe is this nice lady or whatever, and she starts to kind of suck him into the jar, and thankfully he has the dog is there at that point.
Yeah,
I believe. Yeah,
the
dog is there, and so he's kind of able to sort of snap him out of it. And he says, no, I'm not going to do that. And he ends up in the attic. He ends up in the attic looking for Cersei in one of the jars. He finds her, and he destroys jars. He starts to destroy more. And you see the owls are pecking at the glass, and Maka is trying to get in. It's a pretty tense moment, I think.
It is. That's really a classic villain scene, type of scene where they're having to really fight against this villain. Yeah. Even though she's not necessarily the villain, but in their mind she is, and in this scene she definitely is.
Yeah, and you also, in these scenes and him remembering his story, you get to see his mom go running. You get to see a little bit more when she says, "I have to save our baby. I'm so sorry," and then you see his dad say hello to Cersei, and just this idea that he's holding on to this hair of memory, and just crying, poor Ben, and that moment really gets me.
Yeah. Oh, seriously, I know. It's emotional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Ben, so Maka says to Ben, "You see, I've taken all her cares away." And Ben says, "No, it doesn't help at all. It just makes things worse." And so it's interesting, that dynamic. And then Ben tells Cersei, she says, "I shouldn't have been so mean to you. It's not your fault.
Yeah.
I should have been a better brother to you." And that's when he sings the Selkie song, because she's getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And I love when he sings that song. It's so
isn't that a beautiful moment in the film? Because finally, Ben's the one with the real character. I mean, with the real character arc. The dad has his own stuff too, but when Ben comes around, apologizes to Saoirse, and then sings. That's it's tender, and really, really, really one, I think it's just one of the nicest moments.
Yeah, I think so too. And so all the jars are getting destroyed. Maka gets back her feelings, and but Saoirse almost dying, and Maka says to them, "I've been so lost for so long. Please forgive me. I couldn't bear to see my son suffering so much." And so that's when Maka basically makes Clue the dog, makes him be able to fly. So they're able to get home, and then the dad, he sees Circe almost dying. She's getting white hair, she's getting sick, and he tries to take her to the hospital in this boat. And there's a whole part in the book about how they did use some computer animation to help.
Yeah, I wondered about some of that, because it seemed like they probably had to in order to get the desired effect.
Because this movie had a really small budget. According to Wikipedia, it's like $7.5 million, which is just amazing. So they talk in the book about how they were able to integrate the hand-drawn with some of the CG. And it says these sequences were amongst the most challenging and labor-intensive scenes for every department and stretched our resources to the limit. I'm really happy that the final result is so seamless and a great example of how, with clever use of technology, we can make a hand-drawn film independently with relatively tiny budgets. So that's pretty cool.
It is cool.
Yeah. And you're just so frustrated because you're like, why won't you listen to your child?
Yeah.
Listen.
This is where finally, that's where the dad has to figure things out. In this part, it is so frustrating.
And so you see Ben dive into the water, and he goes and he's able, with the help of the seals, he's able to find the trunk, get the silky coat out, get it on Circe, and she's able to start to recover. And so, that whole sequence is just amazing. It's so good. So, then they get kind of washed up on McLear Island, and they have to kind of convince Circe to sing the Song of the Sea. And so they end up all of them singing the Song of the Sea. And that's what wakes up the McLear. And so McLear and Maka and the fairies and everybody basically can go on to the afterlife. They can
progress and get out of this sad state that they've been in.
And then so the mother then appears, and so Circe has the option where she can stay human, since she's half human, half silky, or she can go with her mother. And at first the mom's just about going to take her, but they all say, please don't take her from us. And it's
I know.
Every time. So good.
It's so good.
And I just love the moment between the mother and Ben when she says, "My son, remember me in your stories. I will always love you."
Yeah.
It's me every time.
Yeah. No, it's really beautiful because, they figure stuff out, and also Saoirse is as you said, is all they've got of their mother too.
Yeah.
And she, and she wants to stay too, and it's really I love that sequence. I love what the animators did with their hair. How the hair is just kind of floating in the wind on both the mother and on Saoirse, and again, just this perfect lighting, and it's so emotional, and it's so well done.
Yeah, it's so good. And just if you think about when you've lost somebody, just the ability, sometimes you do get closure and you're able to say goodbye, but I think anybody can kind of understand how much this would mean to Ben to get to say goodbye to his mother.
I know, just here these characters have been so broken, since their mothers, since she left. Well, and also for the dad too, and it's just so nice to have that healing moment.
Yeah.
For them to be made. I mean, they're never going to be necessarily whole, but they're going to be healed, right. and hopefully able to move forward.
Yeah. And the dad, he does say, he says, it's as though I've been asleep all these years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then he's finally able to, you see the granny at the end, and he's kind of able to reassure her that they're ready now. So this is a movie that I love. I adore it. I know a lot of people, when it was nominated, they were like, how could you nominate this instead of the Lego movie? And I don't think that they should have nominated The Box Trolls as much as I enjoyed that movie. But I certainly think they should have nominated this. I think it's just a absolutely beautiful movie. And you know what's interesting is that I think a lot of people would see this movie and be like, oh, it's too sad for kids. But I'm serious. Every single kid I have introduced them to this movie, they all love it. Yeah. I haven't yet found a single child who hasn't liked this movie.
I don't think it's too sad for kids either. I mean, clearly it's kind of a bit of a heavy subject matter, but it's done in a way that kids, I think, can comprehend it. And there's enough going on too that I think would keep their interest. But it would be meaningful, and I also think it would be healing for a kid who's had some challenges, or has suffered a loss.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and because it's also got fairies and it's got magical sequences. And I mean, you really think about the early, Disney films that, your Bambis and your, and even Snow White, it has death and sadness and grief and all of that kind of thing. And, Pinocchio, you have Geppetto just sobbing. And I think that's okay. I mean, I feel like this movie is kind of a little bit in the spirit of Secret of NIMH too.
Mm-hmm.
Got some of that in there. And I don't know, it's just got such heart. And I think the kids respond to that. And they respond to things that are authentic and not preaching to them or condescending. This movie isn't condescending to children at all.
No, not at all. In fact, on the contrary, it just respects them and their emotions, I think so much. Plus, it's so amazing to look at. It's an art style that often reminded me too of like a wonderful children's illustrated book. Just because again, it's so it's so unique and so stylistic that just the visual style of it. I often just felt like I was looking at a wonderful illustration. That's come to life.
Yeah, and it's such an authentic version of childhood that I think kids respond to that as well. Mm-hmm. That so often in film and things that we're afraid to allow children to be angry, to be sad, and yet kids feel all those feelings because they're human beings just like us. And so I really like that about it, and I just love it. I think it's one of my favorite animated films. When I did my top 50 countdown, it actually was in my top 10.
Oh, wow.
Along with Secret of NIMH and Prince of Egypt are all in my top 10.
Yeah.
And Spirited Away is in there. I don't know. I just love it. And I just feel like Tomm Moore must be a really special person to have this in his heart and have a movie be able to make. I can't even imagine what that would be like, to be able to have something like this inside you. It's beautiful. And so I don't know, I'm just so impressed with him. And so if you have not seen these movies from Tomm Moore, I really challenge you to check them out.
Check them out.
They are special, and he's a very special animator, and I can't wait to see what he does next. And it's a movie, I think it's called Wolf Walkers. That I think Apple actually bought. So I think it's going to be.
Oh, that's right. I think that the Cartoon Saloon has got a deal with Apple. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's pretty exciting. So anyway, I think we basically covered it. So yeah, and I'll have a link in the description if you want to pick up the art book. Then I'll have a link and you can check it out. And I have links to all the movies as well on Amazon. If people are interested, they can take a look. So yeah, it was really fun to talk about.
Oh, absolutely, Rachel. Thank you again.
This is a movie that I can't talk about and not get emotional. I always cry when I talk about this movie, but it's so good.
Good movie. Good stuff.
Very good. All right. Well, next month, speaking of my top 10 favorite animated films, in honor of Easter coming up, we are going to be talking about The Prince of Egypt, which I'm really excited to talk about.
I'm excited to watch that one too. That's a DreamWorks movie I can get behind. I really love that film. So
me too.
Forward to that.
Like I said, one of my favorites. So there you go. That's what's coming up for Obscure Animation in April. So let us know in the comments section what you think about Song of the Sea and The Secret of the Kells. And thanks so much, Stanford. I really appreciate it. And where can people find you?
All right, well, I'm on Twitter at Stanford Clark, and I also have a movie blog and podcast that's at moviespastandpresent.com.
Great. And we'll have all that in the description section. Check it out. And you can find me at Rachel's Reviews on iTunes and on YouTube and all of our social media. So if you're listening on iTunes, please give us your ratings and reviews. We really appreciate it. And if you're listening on YouTube or watching, give us a thumbs up and please subscribe to the channel. That would be great. And thanks so much. And we will talk again next month.
Thank you. See ya.
Bye.